Welcome to this week's episode of Walkin' 90. I'll be your host this week, Chip, and I'm joined by Donny and Ross, who are no strangers to you if you listen to League One broadcasts. Donny has been doing voiceover work for the league for the past year, and Ross has been doing it, I believe, since the inception of the league. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Great.
Well, thanks, Chip. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to start off with a real hot question. I want to know specifically why both of you hate my team and only my team and always like the team that we're playing against.
That's right. We hate every team, especially yours, no matter who you are.
Mm-hmm.
That's how
it's
it
like
works.
when I get called a Greenville fan. I'm like, no, I just do their home games. I mean, you get to be a fan of every team, I think, once you do them a couple of times and you interact with their fans. But yeah, we definitely hate Omaha for sure.
It is a phenomenon that I do have to talk to people about sometimes because, even when they talk to me about, oh, I hate Joe Buck or I hate, fill in the name of a famous national broadcaster. Oh, I hate that guy. He's always biased against my team. It's like, no, he's not. He's just trying to be neutral. And because he's not totally in your team's corner, you perceive him as being against your team. He's not, or she's not. Like, they're just trying to call as fair a game as possible. We're not always perfect, but we really do our best because we love every team.
Exactly.
That's right.
It is interesting. We had that here in Omaha. The beat writer for Creighton basketball got accused of not supporting the team, and he went on Twitter and it's like, I'm not a Creighton fan. I'm a Missouri basketball fan. It's my job to cover the team. I cover the team non-biasedly. I'm not cheering for them. I'm not cheering against them. I am just, here to cover the team and write the stories and tell about them. If you want like biased coverage, like that's not what a beat writer does.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes people misunderstand that, which is okay. Like, look, I'm a huge River Plate fan. River Plate are winning right now 3-1, by the way. And, so I'm a totally unhinged fan when it comes to my teams. But so I get it.
As my good buddy Neil Rule always says, I'm a fan of whichever team is paying me.
Yes.
In our case, it's the league, so we're fans of the league.
Well, speaking of that, I know that announcing games and doing play-by-play is a lot of people's like bucket list dream job. So how did you two guys, of all the people, end up doing play-by-play for a living?
Go
ahead. Well, all right. Well, yeah, for me, it's kind of been a long, winding journey over the last 14 years now. So I started out, I was in minor league baseball for a long time. I played baseball through college and just went straight into a minor league gig 2 days after my last college final because that was the sport I knew the best. That was the sport I had played, and that was where I got a break. So then I ended up being with a minor league team full time for 8 years in Central California. And then I moved out to Omaha to work for the AAA team there, which was just a seasonal job. But I'd been in A-ball for so long that I was ready for something new. So I took this seasonal job with the AAA team out there and did that for several years, but then got into broadcasting other stuff in Omaha with Creighton and UNO. So for those that aren't from Omaha who are listening or watching this, there's 2 different Division I schools in Omaha, about 8 miles apart, which is pretty unique. And then, of course, there's Nebraska, the Huskers down the road in Lincoln. So it's a pretty great sports area, college sports especially. And so I ended up doing 7 different sports between Creighton and UNO and got into a high school football Thursday night TV package. And so I was doing a bunch of stuff there and then got into voiceover work on the side, and voiceover stuff ended up becoming my main job Monday through Friday. So I don't necessarily have to do sports broadcasting, but it's still my favorite thing to do. And I still want to do as much of it as possible. And then met my wife in Omaha. We got married. Then she got diagnosed with an autoimmune condition where she'd noticed that cold weather was making her really miserable in those Nebraska winters. And we figured out it was because of this condition she had. The doctors basically told her, for the sake of your health and long-term quality of life, you should move to warmer weather if you can. So she's actually from Lakeland, which is in Central Florida. And so we moved here about a year and a half ago. And I knew that the studio that centralizes a lot of the USL broadcasts was in Florida. So I reached out to them after I moved down here. And I figured if I'm going to keep broadcasting, which I definitely want to, I want to do the sport that I'm actually the most passionate about, which has been soccer for the last 25 years. I love every sport in America, but I followed soccer compulsively around the world. My favorite teams in Argentina and Uruguay and England and Scotland and, so I'm pretty nuts about it. And of course, I've been pretty invested in American soccer's growth since I was in high school and got made fun of for liking soccer because it was not cool to like soccer in America back in the late 90s. So yeah, I was like, well, if I'm going to keep broadcasting and spend the time that it takes to do it as well as I can, I want it to be the sport that I've really loved the most. So it's a great chance to finally get to do that. And so that's what I've been doing for the last year.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah. I came a much different path to the broadcasting side of things. My background was in written journalism. I worked for a lot of the local papers here. It was way back part-time at the Palm Beach Post, which is still in business somehow. And then I worked at CBSSports.com. I was a golf producer there, of all things. We did the PGA Tour's website for a while before we lost that deal. And then I was a fantasy writer. And I remember the day we were just starting to do video, and was it USA beat Spain? I can't remember which tournament it was in. And they just said, "Who knows soccer?" And, it was in the middle of not the middle of the night, but the middle of the evening. And they threw me and my buddy Sergio Gonzalez, who's now the national NBA editor for The Athletic, and he's doing all right for himself. So they just threw us in front of the cameras and said, just talk about this game, because they had nobody else there that knew anything about soccer. So that was my first sort of foray into doing anything in front of a camera or behind a microphone. And then Mike Friedman, who's our boss at Vista, he worked there at CBSSports.com as well. And then he went off to Houston and then came back to work for University of Houston, came back to work for Vista WorldLink, who's the company that we do the work for, NEP. And he asked me if I had, when we started doing USL stuff, he reached out and said, "Do you have any interest in doing broadcasting?" I said, "Mike, I've never done this in my life." He said, "Just give it a shot. You got the accent. People think you know what you're talking about, even if you don't." And I said, "All right, well, listen, I'll just do color at first, because I don't think my brain works fast enough to do play-by-play." So I did some championship stuff. Somebody at Ryan Sudol on Twitter reminded me today, it was 5 years ago. I think it must have been today, because he must have got a reminder about it. We called a Didier Drogba goal for the Phoenix Rising in one of my first games, and that goal ended up going viral. It was one of his last goals, I think, in USL Championship. And then so I did color, and then when League One started, he asked me if I wanted to do all the Greenville home games. At that time, it was alongside Chris Makoviak, who's now been replaced by Mark Schoenster, two very competent and awesome dudes who helped me along the way. And I've started to do some play-by-play stuff the last couple of years in League One. And I think I almost enjoy play-by-play more now than color. I'm not the most analytical guy in the world, so I think it helps a little bit to do the play-by-play. And it was now into my 5th season of doing Greenville Triumph home games, and then filling in here and there on the play-by-play side of things in League One.
Nice. Yeah, and it's certainly been fun with the announcers and getting to know everybody. And I think that's kind of like the cool part about League One is it's a small league, so you kind of know who people are. And to a certain degree, if you just turn on the TV, even if you don't know who's playing, you can kind of guess just based on who's doing the announcing. I know for you, Ross, when I first heard you announcing games, I was like, where is that accent from? And I was convinced for the longest time that
I still get grief for it.
Yeah, I was like, he's got to be a Kiwi. He's got to be from New Zealand. And but then I learned that you're from England. That's kind of like my running conspiracy theory that I'm 100% convinced is real, is that English people just make up all these accents just to confuse Americans. And in the privacy of their home, they all speak with like a Cockney accent, every single one of them.
No, I had this hybrid mess at home. And I've been here, just over 30 years now. So I moved here when I was 16, so I'm surprised I still have any English accent left, to be honest.
So do you think it's surprising because of how the USL does it, where you guys consistently call the same games? Do you think people are surprised to learn that you guys are not live at the stadiums for every game, but you're thousands of miles away in some instances?
I think it depends who's doing the games. I think for certain people that have done live stuff, like Donny, all I've ever known is doing it on a monitor. So for me, I don't think you know any different. But I think certainly, those that have done it live, and I'm sure Donny can talk to that, about how much more difficult it is to not be able to just turn your head and see what's going on and see where the positions are, where people are positioned, etc. And Donny, you can probably expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, it is definitely different. And for League One games, typically we have one screen. For championship games, we're in studios that there's usually a secondary monitor that has some alternate camera angles that you can glance at. But yeah, there are definitely things you don't see as well, and you have to learn to compensate for. But the plus side is you can broadcast 2 or 3 games in a day from all around the country or sometimes around the world. I got to do 6 games in 3 days for the CONCACAF U17 tournament this last week, which was pretty awesome. And all those games were in Guatemala. So I would never get a chance to do those games in a million years if they weren't centralized out of this studio. So yeah, there's pluses and minuses to it, but I've made the adjustment and I really like what it allows us to do. Even if it's always better to be there in person if you can, but there are trade-offs to everything.
Well, you don't get all those frequent flyer miles, but you're also there at home with your family, which is, I'm sure, is
That
a plus.
too. No, that's
Yes.
that's definitely true. You don't have to travel all around to call all these games, which is a big advantage.
It's
I mean,
certainly crazy.
some of the stadiums, I will say, the cameramen are great. Especially until the NFL starts to get going, you do get the elite guys at some of the stadiums that really have an idea of what they're doing and how a soccer game should be filmed. And listen, sometimes we don't get the best cameraman, and you're sort of left to deal with what you are on the screen. And sometimes you miss goals, and you're not sure who scored, and you just got to kind of let it play out. But when I started doing college stuff live after, I was like, oh man, this is the best. I will say, because you can just see so much more and really give it a little bit more atmosphere to what's going on when you're actually there, and you can obviously hear the nets as well.
Yeah, well, the best was definitely like NoCo last year when they played at Colorado State, and they're like at the top of the press box. You can see the whole field, and it's like this is living. Like that was the best camera angle we've had in League One. So I guess that's a good question though: is who has the best camera work in League One, and who has the worst angle?
Well, camera work and angles are two different things. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus for
who has the best and worst angle.
Oh man, that's a tough one. Donny, you go and I'll think about this one.
I like Richmond has a pretty good camera angle. Richmond has a pretty good setup, I think, which is not surprising because they've been doing it for 30 years. So
yeah, and they're on top of the. If you haven't been to Richmond before, for anybody, they have like a big grandstand with like a press box up there that goes down, and then everyone sits on the other side. So they have that nice high angle, which makes their games a lot of fun to watch, just because you get pretty good angles, which is nice.
I like Tucson's one after they flipped it, because it was on the other side of the field, and then they flipped it to the other side. And you could actually see the fans, which we couldn't previously. So I always like to see the fans in the background. So I think Greenville will have a much better one this year, being at Paladin Stadium. I assume they have relatively decent spots there to put the cameras. I think there aren't too many great ones. I will say that, but it does a lot. It doesn't. If you have a good camera spot, but then you have poor camera guys that don't particularly understand soccer or don't know when to focus in and out, it doesn't really matter how good the camera position is. But we make it work.
Yeah, I think the worst one probably is Madison before they flipped it, and it makes sense why they wanted it to show all the fans that were at their games, and now it shows the press, like the suites.
The suites, yeah.
And Chattanooga kind of had the same angle too, because they both like were backed up onto like a highway, so they couldn't get far enough back. So like Madison even had like a guy on the ground, and they like cut randomly to it. But like Chattanooga has this like little semicircle around where you just can't see the ball if it's down there, because it's like, well, there's nowhere else for this camera to go. Like we can't just like point it down at the field.
Yeah, and I think as more and more teams get their own soccer specific stadiums, that will continue to improve. I know even Chattanooga, I think they haven't finished, or at least as of last year, they hadn't finished building out that near side, which was the side the camera's on. So I mean, all this stuff is going to get better. The production quality will continue to improve as it has over the last handful of years. All this stuff, the reality is all of this stuff is a gradual build out, and we have to be. The progression happens over time, just like with anything else, and we all want it to happen right away. But the fact that we're able to broadcast all these Division III and Division II soccer games in the U.S., and the fact that people can watch Division III and Division II soccer in the U.S. from any team and any game pretty easily and accessibly, it's pretty amazing for somebody like me who grew up hardly being able to watch soccer at all in the late 90s.
I think it's definitely something that I'm glad the league seems to prioritize, is having all the games be available on TV with the ESPN package and everything else. That was super nice. I know that's something that when Omaha was announced, I was really surprised to learn that, yes, you can watch every single game. And no, you don't have to pay some like weird fee or go to some sketchy website like we used to have to do for basketball games back in the day. It's on TV. And then we had, not last year, but the year before that, we had games on like actual like broadcast television. It's been super nice. I know that's one of the things with some of my friends who have started to get into Union Omaha soccer. They're shocked to learn that not only is it on TV, but it's a professional quality product with, great announcers, great camera work. Like you get great graphics packages, and you can see the whole thing. And you wouldn't know it was third division soccer if you saw it. And that's something where, we don't, in England, you don't even have that for championship. You can't watch every single game of championship if you wanted to. You end up paying £15 a game to watch non-home games, which is like ridiculous.
Yeah, I was picky and choosy last 2 years when Bournemouth were in the championship. I was like, man, that's the one reason I really want to get back up to the Premier League so I can watch every game. And the years before we got in the Premier League, you couldn't watch any games here except the occasional game that got picked up on national TV in England. But yeah, no, it's awesome the way we do things in USL.
Mm-hmm. And that's also kind of like the fun thing of having that and being able to watch it. My story that I like telling all the time when we talk about broadcast is Ross shouted out the group that I watch games with, the Benson Hooligans Club, shout out BHC, who watched down at St. Andrews right by my house. And I met two guys at the game after the Open Cup game. And they said, hey, were you at the game? And I was like, yeah, for sure. Like, it was super fun. Was telling them about the game in Minnesota. And they're like, oh, yeah, we didn't realize people watched here until the guy on the thing said, hey, like, they're watching down in Benson at St. Andrews. And so because of that, I met these awesome guys, and they've been coming to all the games, and we hang out all the time now. And just because Ross, was kind enough to shout out a group that he didn't have to. And I think that's the cool thing, that every single game, it seems like the announcers are shouting out where different supporters groups are watching the game. And I think that really helps those groups grow, and it really helps people find the sport and the community around it, which is kind of the cool thing about lower league soccer in general.
Yeah, we really want to shout out those supporter groups too. Like, I always try the groups that I know about, I try to give shout outs to during games that I do. If I know that their team is playing away and I know that group's watching at a certain location, if somebody tells me about it before a game, I try to write it down and give them a shout out. So anybody who's going to be watching games this year, feel free to tweet me before the game with where you're watching from, which supporters group you guys are, and I'll do my best to remember to give you a shout out, because that's important. I mean, especially the diehards that are either at every match or watching every match together. Yeah, we want to make sure that we give you guys love.
Mm-hmm. There's always people looking to watch too, which is the fun part. And I think that's, again, the cool thing about being kind of in the ground floor and seeing it grow. And it's going to be crazy to see what this all develops to in like 20, 30 years.
Totally. I'm super excited about the USL. It's one of the reasons I have to drive 3.5 to 4 hours each way to do these games, by the way. I don't live right by Fort Lauderdale where this studio is. So, I leave at 9 or 10 in the morning on a Saturday to go do games, and I get back sometimes, depending on whether I have a 7 Eastern time or even a 10 o'clock Eastern time start. Sometimes I don't get back till 3 or 4 in the morning, but I love doing it, and it's what I want to do. And partly because I love what the USL's doing, and I'm really fascinated by their project overall, between League One and Championship and the Super League coming next year and League Two. Like, everything they're doing, I think is so neat, and it's such a fascinating thing that I can't wait, like you said, to see how it grows and blossoms and expands over the next decade plus.
Mm-hmm. So kind of talking about game days. So let's talk about prep. So I know, especially from doing this podcast, I've learned that there's a lot more work behind the scenes than you think. And I'm sure it's the same thing with announcing. So on game day and the days leading up to game day, kind of what does that look like from your end, from like the pre-interviews with the coaches to what you write down on your cheat sheet before the game to being in the booth itself? Kind of what are you guys doing on game day to provide the best product possible?
Go ahead, Ross.
I have other jobs, so for me sometimes it's difficult depending on the week. But yeah, usually a coach call, it can be anywhere from some of them even on Wednesdays, Thursdays, mostly, some even on Tuesdays. So you got to prep for that so you don't sound like an idiot. Obviously, depending on the time of the year, whether you're talking about last season or some of the new, incoming players. It depends what you're going to talk about. They do get a little tedious. I'm sure Donny will agree as the season goes on, especially when you're doing the same teams over and over like we are, and especially when you sometimes have coaches that don't want to open up as much as some coaches do. I know Donny and I have both experienced that with our home team coaches on occasion. They're very media savvy, and even at USL League One level, they don't want to open up too much about their plans for the weekend. Some of them are very good about it, and we're obviously very good in that we don't give out any information. On Twitter, we do work for the league, so we're looking out for everybody. Mm-hmm. But yeah, obviously going back and watching as much of the previous, couple of games and highlights of as many games as you can. I think for me, I try to watch at least the previous game in full, just to get an idea, what a team's doing tactically and how they've been doing of late. And then, Donny's got a lot more experience than me of doing the call sheets. I had to sort of learn as I went along, and I think every broadcaster does that, sort of finds their niche with how they do it. Some like to write it down. Mark Schoenstein, my buddy now I work with, he types them onto labels and does them, and everybody has their different way of doing it. I love doing the sheets in advance, and I've started doing already for the first game and for Greenville. Having that information, I'm sure Donny will agree, you don't use 90% of it, but it's always good to have it there at your disposal. And I know some people enjoy writing it because it seems to get into their heads a little easier than when they type it in. Donny, how do you do it? I mean, the call sheets are very important, and everybody has their own way of doing it.
Yeah, totally. And I totally agree with what you said, that a lot of times you don't end up using 90% of what you prep. I heard a broadcaster say years ago that if you use probably more than 20% of your prep during a game, you've probably talked way too much. But it's like, yes, preparing for a game is like preparing for an exam or a test, in that you don't know what's actually going to be on the test. So if you're going to prep well to try to get an A or at least a solid B plus, you kind of have to prep for a wide array of what might be on the test, so that whatever subset ends up actually being relevant, you're ready for. And so, yeah, it starts with those coach calls, which, as Ross said, usually either Wednesday or Thursday. I record those calls, and then I play them back, and I don't transcribe the whole calls, but I will note anything interesting that a coach has said, and I'll transcribe those quotes that I think are relevant or that I think will make a good soundbite during the game. So I make little, I call them talking point sheets, which is usually around 2 to 3 pages per game. So I'll have one team and relevant stats going into that game, just basic stuff that jumps off the page, like, all right, they're winless in their last 5, or they've won 4, or they've, unbeaten in their last 8, like those stats that make you immediately go, wow, okay, I need to mention that. I'll note all those things down. If there's anything between these two sides, interesting past meetings or series history, stuff like that. So I try to write all of that down in advance, just so that it's there. And then interesting trends for each team, stuff that the coach has said they're working on, stuff that the coach has said they're preparing for this week with this particular team that they're playing. And like Ross said, some coaches are much more talkative with you and much more willing to share. Some coaches are surprisingly very open and will be totally blunt and honest, to the point where we have to actually not give out some of the things they tell us, because it's like, well, I appreciate that you trust us that much. You probably don't want us saying that verbatim on the air. But yeah, then other coaches aren't quite as, they don't talk quite as much. So it just depends. You get different things from different coaches. But like you said, it's a small league. So you do tend to get to know certain coaches pretty well over the course of the year, because you talk to them multiple times. And so at least my experience last year was that as the year got later, certain coaches had spoken with me 4, 5, 6 times, and they felt more comfortable with me, and they opened up a bit more, which is always fun. It's good to develop relationships with coaches. So yeah, I type out a bunch of stuff, print out a bunch of stuff, bring it with me. And then when the lineups come out about an hour before kickoff, I write out all the names on little Post-its and put them on a board and arrange them how I think they're going to line up tactically. Of course, sometimes teams surprise you, and some guy ends up switched on the left when you thought he'd be on the right. So I end up moving my Post-its around after kickoff when I see where they actually are. But it just helps me to have the team laid out on little Post-its, so I kind of know where to look for different players. Because especially when you're calling the game off a screen, sometimes some teams have more visible numbers on their shirts than others. And so the more you can do to help yourself know who should be where approximately, the easier it is to identify players, because in the heat of the moment, in a big moment, in some games, there might only be one or two big moments. Knowing who's involved is super critical. And the more you can help yourself know that, the better. Sometimes you still don't, no matter what you do, but you try to put yourself in the best position that you can.
Donny's a great user of the walls in the studios too. I noticed some commentators use the walls in the studios, just the extra space. I'm not one to do that, but it's awesome. I walk by and I just see what they've got on the wall. And listen, I learn from just poking my head in and seeing what they're doing and listening for every game I watch that these guys do. Donny's been doing it a lot longer than me, Ken Levick, and all the other guys we have that have been doing games for two decades almost. No matter what the sport, I learn something every time I go in there. It's awesome.
I always like watching, if you don't follow him, Derek Ray Combs on Twitter. He is a Bundesliga commentator. I think he's like, I would say he's like your favorite soccer commentator's favorite soccer commentator would be like a nice way to put it. So he does a lot of the Bundesliga English broadcast, and it is crazy when he posts his prep sheets, and it's like all this little tiny writing and lines all over the place, and it's like, I do not know how that is usable, but it obviously works for him, and it's kind of, I'm sure that one of those things where everyone kind of has a system that works for them, and if you had to use someone else's system, it'd probably drive you up a wall.
Everybody's different.
Yeah, I think when I first started, I just got online and just Googled what people did and took a bit from everybody, and then listened to some podcasts, just commentator-based podcasts about how they came through the game and ideas of what to do and what not to do. I remember Boog Shambi always just said, just don't say stupid stuff. That was the one thing I always remember. Just don't say anything stupid.
Don't do an ad read during a goal.
Well, yeah, that too.
We'll get to that in a second.
Listen. There's nothing wrong with reading an ad read during a goal. It's realizing that the goal is happening while the ad read is going on.
When it's the first rule of broadcasting: no free ads. It's like, hey, I already started the ad. You don't get to.
It'll never happen again.
It's happened to everybody at some point. The other thing I do to prep for games, this is not to pander, because you're not the only podcast I listen to, but because I have a 3.5-4 hour drive every 100%. Weekend, like I'll listen to fan podcasts on my way down. I'll listen to the latest Walk in 90. I'll listen to League One on the Rocks. I'll listen to, we've got some new ones coming on the scene this year, which is great. If whatever teams I'm doing, if they have a fan podcast, I'll listen to the latest episode of that, because I want to be in that mind frame as much as possible as I'm driving down to the game, where I'm up to date. My brain is up to date on what the situation is in the league, what the situation is with those teams. And sometimes listening to fans talk about the league or those teams, I hear stuff or angles or points of view that I hadn't considered. And so sometimes stuff that I hear on podcasts driving in ends up, I end up repeating it on the air because it's fresh in my head, and, it helps me in that way too.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting with the league, because I think Omaha is spoiled in this regard. We don't necessarily have like a beat writer for the local paper for Union Omaha. It's just like a guy who I think almost just, I don't even know if he's there half the time, but he just like regurgitates some stats, maybe a quote or two from the press conference, and that's like kind of it. But I think for a lot of teams, they don't have like any press coverage locally besides the fan podcast, which I think is, again, for doing a podcast, it's a great way to, get out there, because you are like one of the voices for it. But it is probably a bit interesting compared to like if you covered a Creighton basketball game. There's pages upon pages of everything. There's human interest pieces. There's, you can find out what every single player eats for breakfast from some article they wrote. But for this league, it's like, well, it's essentially a box score in the paper. Like, here you go, have fun. But with that, I know, like, I'm really excited with the Opta announcement that was announced today from the league. Hopefully that means that we as fans will have a lot better access to stats. Do you guys, last year, did you have a lot of access to stats, or were you also in like the same boat as us, where it's like, man, if he's not in the top 10 of assists, how do I find out how many assists this guy has? Or like, when was the last time he scored? And, things like that, where normally you're so used to having that for other sports, but for League One, it was like, you really couldn't find anything. What was your access like for that?
I mean, we did have Opta. We've had Opta, I think, every year. I think we've been there, and we do use the live game stats a lot. And our producers, especially Ryan Rose, who does a ton of the League One games, he is the guru of getting into the backside of the Opta, the back end of the Opta things, I should say, and really pulling out some amazing stats that you see during the games. And he'll pull those out onto the graphics. But yeah, I'm excited to expand it. I know when I'm doing research for games, sometimes I get a little frustrated in how much work I do have to do. I know the Opta, it's such a massive database. Donny will agree that trying to go through it sometimes is difficult. But the site, the league does a reasonable job, I think, as you say, Chip. They could do a little better job in opening up the stats to the fans, and especially in this day and age where it's so easily accessible. As long as somebody's paying for it, if the league's paying for it, it shouldn't be that hard to get somebody to write some code and get it up in a format that everybody can really enjoy.
Yeah, that was definitely the most nerve-wracking thing of whenever we do like a mid-season team of the team 11 or an end of season top 11. It's like, I just know that I'm going to miss like some guy who's like a real stud and put some guy in who shouldn't be in there at all. Cause it's like, I don't know. I think he's pretty good. I think he has a lot of assists, but I can't tell by looking at him. But I think that was like with Donny, where if you didn't know Donny Villadere's stats from Omaha, it was like, well, what's so special about this guy? And it's like, well, I can tell you because the team posts about it, but, he led the league in chances, led the league in big chances, led the league in crosses, led the leagues in like big opportunities. And it's like every single non-scoring category he led the league in. And it's like, yeah, that's probably pretty good. He's probably pretty good at the soccer thing.
That he is. We miss him.
I do. Especially last year when we could have used a little bit more in the box. We definitely missed him. But, Jibo is no slouch either. I mean, he just got drafted by Minnesota, which is still one of the craziest stories of this offseason.
Yeah. J Mims knows how to find him. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
But with that, game day is like, do you guys have any weird game day superstitions? Like, Ross, are you eating a tuna and peanut butter sandwich before you go in, or some beans on toast? Or
now we do get fed at the studio, and I wouldn't say it's a weekly thing, but I try to be careful with what I eat before the game, just because sometimes I never know. I don't have a sensitive stomach or anything, but you just never know. There's certain things I'm like, man, if I eat that before this game, because we get there 2 hours before, and you eat, and it has time to settle, and you get to halftime. And obviously, if you had a chance to run if there's a two. That's the one thing I have, is that if I had to leave Mark alone for 5 minutes, it wouldn't be the end of the world. And Donny doesn't have that luxury. It's Donny or nothing. So I try to just watch what I eat before the game.
Yeah, I like to, when I can, there's a Sprouts market that's just around the corner from the studio. So a lot of times when I drive in before I head to the studio, I'll stop at that store, and I like to, this sounds bougie, but like they have these little sushi rolls. They're not big and they're not expensive, but I like to eat one of those a couple hours before a game. I just find that like, well, I like fish anyway, but I find that like fish and avocado is really, I feel like my brain feels sharper when I eat something like that. It doesn't have to be that, but something relatively good before a game, because if I eat crap before a game, then my brain just isn't as sharp and as quick as it ideally needs to be to handle, a sudden moment that comes out of nowhere in a game that ends up deciding the match. I want to be, again, I want to put myself in a position to be as sharp for that as I can be within reason.
Ross just dropped off, but I have a really funny mental picture in my head, because for you guys, your voice is your trade, and that's how you're making your money doing this. Ross is a chatty Cathy for all of those of you who don't chat with Ross very often, but Ross works at the airport down there, and I just have this hilarious vision in my head of Ross just holding up a little sign before he does announcements and saying, "I'm on vocal rest today."
Yeah, it is. Since I do voiceover work during the week, I do end up talking quite a bit to make money. That is how I earn a living. And so I mean, I got sick over the holidays traveling, and it hung on for a good month and a half, where my voice was good enough to do what I needed to do, but it was not great for a long time. And that's not fun. So yeah, like I drink water pretty religiously. I try to eat fairly well. I try to take care of myself as well as I can, getting good sleep as much as possible. is pretty important for your voice. Anytime you start to feel sick or run down, I mean, you typically feel it in your voice first, and that's not great when you have to talk all the time. So, so yeah, I do try to take care of myself as best as I can so that it's in as good a shape as it can be.
Mhm. For sure. And so this has been really great listening to you guys and like kind of getting some of the behind the scenes on what goes on game day. So let's kind of end with some fun stuff. So what's your favorite goal call that you've ever done?
Oh, I think mine was Bijev for Fuego at the start of last season when I called him something about the Bulgarian magician. It was such a big game. I'm going to get my seatbelt on as my chauffeur is driving me home, so I'm not driving. I promise you.
Yes, be safe, Ross.
Yeah, Ross doesn't drive; he gets drove.
That's right.
I'm riding. Yes, that's right. This is the good thing about having a 15-year-old son and being old like that. No, I think the Bijev goal last year, because it was a great hook. I don't know if you remember the goal, Chipper. He hooked it back over his head and into the net. I think it was for the 3-3 tie at that point. And obviously, Bijev, it was the beginning of the season, and he didn't quite live up to expectations. I don't think. But it was one of those goals that, I'm probably going to remember for a while. It was some of my goal calls. I got better as my play-by-play has gone on. One thing I've really learned is, I used to try to describe a little too much. And I think now, I'm learning that they're watching it. They can see what's going on. You don't need to really describe whether somebody's hitting it with their left foot or their right foot. So I'm getting better with that. And that was, try not to say in the back of the net. Back of the net was one of the things I always used to. It was one of my crutches, and I've got away from that. So I think my Bijev goal last year was one of my best ones.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, last year was my first year of doing a full professional season. So I had done, I know you know this, Chip, but some people might not. I had done Creighton men's and women's soccer for about 4 or 5 years there in Omaha, and I'd done some for UNO as well. So Creighton, well, both Creighton and UNO have great college soccer stadiums, like 2 of the best soccer backdrops in the country. Creighton does broadcasts of all their men's and women's home soccer matches. So I did a lot of those. But, the college soccer season is very short. It's almost like, especially if you don't travel with the team, it's almost like a college football season where you have maybe 9 or 10 home games and then you're done. So last year was my first year getting to do 40 or 50 soccer matches over a 6 or 7 month season, which was great. I'd always wanted to do that. I just had never gotten to do it. So I feel like I got a lot better at soccer last year, getting to do it consistently week in and week out. And I really refined a lot of stuff and figured out a lot of stuff about how I want to call soccer and what do I bring to the sport. Because I basically know how I want to call baseball. I've done thousands of baseball games, basketball, bunch of other sports. So yeah, soccer was a real interesting experiment for me last year. And by the time I did the Omaha Chattanooga match in the playoffs last season, which was a great game, when Rafa Menzingen, I know, not from an Omaha standpoint, I know, but when Rafa Menzingen slalomed through the Omaha defense and scored from outside the box in extra time, I still can't decide if I like what I said or not. Sometimes I think it was sort of fun. Sometimes I think it was corny. So I don't know. I think I called it a magic carpet goal because it kind of reminded me of like Aladdin, on the way he kind of slalomed through the defense. I don't know. I still can't decide if I like it or not, but I guess that was the most I'd ever sort of gone for it on a goal call or did something slightly unusual or out of the box. So we'll see what I get up to this year. The U17 tournament that I just did last week was a lot of fun, and the last goal that Guatemala scored against Jamaica in the round of 16 game that I did was super fun because they were the host nation, and so they had a big crowd and it was a great atmosphere. So I liked what I did on Guatemala's match-winning goal too. So I feel like I'm getting better all the time at soccer, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that this year.
Mm-hmm. I would say playoff games, championships, and like cup sets are definitely the time to like really go all out, because it's like, it's going to get replayed. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that Joe Brito slide goal.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen that thing 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Because it gets posted by the Open Cup. It gets posted by Union Omaha, by the league. It's just, and it's always Ross there in the background calling the goal. And it's just like, and it's just like one of those things. Like, I know, like, growing up in Nebraska, you always hear like the man, woman, and child. Does he
Yeah.
put him in the aisles? And like some of those calls where it's like, that guy just like made that up on the spot, but it just kind of lives in infinity, or not infinity. It lives in perpetuity because it is associated with such huge moments for those clubs and teams. So that's kind of cool that your call gets to be a part of history when it's particularly historic.
Yeah. I think Peter Drury is the absolute master at that right now.
Yes.
I mean, he's so good at instantly contextualizing a moment in a really eloquent way. So, yeah, I do try to think before a game, all right, based on where these two teams are at going into this match, what would it mean if this team scored first, or if the other team scored first? Like, how would that change the situation? How would that change the vibe? What might I say about that? I do try to think through that before a game, similar to how a coach. I remember Jay Mims talked to us on a coach call last year about how he has this little leather binder where before a match he's writing out every single scenario he can think of that might happen and what they might
You're
do
in the roundabout.
in that scenario. And so I'm not quite that thorough, I'm sure, but I do try to think about that stuff before a game because the match happens so fast once you get into it. And it goes quickly and moments pass quickly. And so anything I can do to be ready for one of those, I try to do.
Mm-hmm. And so kind of the other side of the coin. So we've already given Ross some crap about when he did an ad read during the Madison goal. What's kind of the one moment that it's like, man, I wish I had that call back, either to do it a little bit different or one where it's like, man, I messed up and hopefully no one realized, or in Ross's case, paying the bills and something happens and it's like, I picked the right spot, but man, that came and bit me in the butt.
Yeah, Omaha's second goal last year against Chattanooga, when they had gone down to 10 men, they were down 1-0. I'm sure you remember, Chip. It was right after they'd beaten Forward Madison after going down to 10 men. Then 4 days later, they go down a goal. I think it was Herzog got sent off early in the second half. So they're down 1-0, down a man. They score an equalizer in the 88th, and then they score in the 93rd to win it, incredibly. And my call was good, except I stumbled halfway through it. And it's subtle. I don't know how much people noticed or not, but it just wasn't clean. And that drove me nuts on my whole 4-hour drive home. I was like, gosh, that's such a memorable comeback and a game sealing moment. And I just didn't call it as clean as I wanted to. And those moments don't come around that often. So it does kind of eat at you when you feel like you didn't make the most of it. So I'm pretty self-critical in general. Maybe too much. I really want to do the best job I can and be as good as I can. So it does eat at me when a moment like that doesn't go how I want it to. But you got to pick yourself up and go at it the next week. And I'm always excited to go do it again the next week and see what happens that next game.
Even the Champions League guys. I mean, the guy that the first Liverpool goal yesterday, the guy thought Gakpo scored it, and it was Nunez.
Right.
I think one thing I've learned is that I used to be terrible at was, especially with play-by-play, was sort of trying to think ahead what was going to happen and almost predict it, and then my brain would get too far ahead of myself, and I've learned to sort of slow down, especially with identifying goal scorers. I know we all get it wrong on occasion, but if you just give it that extra 2 or 3 seconds and learn what to say but not be too specific and say that was the goal scorer, and then most of the time the cameraman will get it, and those of us that watch soccer will know from the celebration who scored it, and I've really learned to sort of give it that extra couple of seconds and let it play out.
Sure. So we asked on Twitter before we start with Donny and Ross, what do you think can be done to make USL League One broadcast better? So let's read through some of these. The first one is, I'd love it. And this is from Connor Hewson, friend of the show. I'd love it, and I'm sure those guys would too, if they were able to be on site for some matches to make commentating experience that much better, which I think would be cool. I know when Ross came to Omaha, calling him a minor celebrity might be a little over the top, but I know when I told people I'd met Ross, a lot of people were quite jealous that I got a beer with Ross before the final.
No, listen, I think there's certain stadiums that we can. I think they would have the capabilities to do it live. I mean, obviously, NCFC do it from the stadium, and there's a few other stadiums out there that have the capability. And I think as the league continues to grow, I think there'll be the opportunity, I hope, for us to do some, live stuff. I think Donny would agree that would be an awesome thing to do, even if it's once or twice a year for them to fly us out there for the biggest game of the week.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would certainly be fun, and obviously getting to experience the full stadium and match day atmosphere is always great, and it always adds a lot as a broadcaster when you're able to really feel it. So yeah, like I said earlier, there's trade-offs, and the fact that we're in studio, it does allow us to do a lot of games that, a lot of this is part of why this league is able to broadcast every game is because they are able to keep the costs down somewhat by centralizing everything or almost everything out of one studio. And while there would be pluses and minuses to going on site with every game, some teams probably would not broadcast their games at all if they had to do everything on site or had to produce everything themselves.
Mhm.
For some teams, that would be cost prohibitive or technology prohibitive. So yeah, it's at this point we're still at a point in American soccer where there are trade-offs, and so that's where we are. So it'd be
Mhm.
great to be at some games live, but like I said, there are advantages to being in studio too, and the fact that we can cover games that we wouldn't otherwise be able to.
Mhm. This is another one we have, which is kind of the same thing. More than one from Mike Umberger from Charlotte. More than one camera and more crowd shots. Also, is there a pregame coverage? It rarely gets shown on my ESPN Plus stream. So a few of those I know, like for the final when it was in Omaha. I don't know if that was an Omaha decision or if that was a league decision, but they did have more than just like the normal cameras they had, which was quite nice on rewatch because I have rewatched that game several times to have that. But again, I think it's kind of the same thing where a lot of those production costs are prohibitive, especially since it's not like even with like a lot of these college sports where they're making big money by broadcasting the games. I think for most of these teams, it's probably a cost center, even with the ads.
Oh yeah,
But for
it would cost a lot to produce these games for each team.
Mhm.
Our League One games do have two cameras, by the way. It's not just one. There are actually two.
Mhm.
The USL Championship games have three cameras.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, again, over time, obviously, we hope that the budgets will increase, the revenues will increase, the budgets will increase, and the number of cameras will increase. And I'm sure the league wants to get there. I know we certainly want to get there. So, but yeah, again, the fact that we can do the games right now with two cameras is certainly better than doing them with none or not at all.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I share that. I hope that we can get to 4 or even 6 cameras
Mhm.
eventually. And I think over time, the league has a chance to get there. We're just not there yet.
Yeah. Personally, I wish they would do less crowd shots because last year they got a rather unflattering
That's
video
right.
of me eating a hot dog.
I remember
And
that.
I had several people send that to me, which was not appreciated, but it was funny. But it's like, God damn it! Of course, like the one time I get something to eat at the stadium, I'm on camera just like inhaling a hot dog. But
Well,
we
that's
got
one of the
two.
best parts. I'm sure Donny will agree when he did CONCACAF stuff, which I did 2 games last year, I think, on the girls' side of things, and then the U.S. Open Cup. We tend to get a couple of more cameras depending on where the game is, and it's almost a different world. Some of the replays you get, from behind the goal, and some of the looks you get, because the replays in USL League One sometimes are, left for lacking, especially with the offside stuff, and
Mhm.
just because you only have the 2 cameras. And I love when I get the chance to do games when I get those extra looks and get to talk about it a little extra.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then we have two that are one is a joke and one is not a joke. And I will let you guys decide which ones. So Jeff Line, friend of the program, another Omaha BHC guys, says, "Can we make Arizona/West Coast based games all day games?" Which would be great because those are
Listen, after
very
last
late.
year, yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that'd be fine with us too, because we wouldn't be at the
Oh my
studio
God.
till midnight, or those Tucson games last year that would get,
Oh,
rain delayed for 3 hours. There were some times where people didn't leave till 5 or 6 in the morning. So
yeah, that was one of the best mental health things I did for myself was just turn that game off. Be like, I'm not going to watch this. And that was right after my kid was born too. So I was up anyways because the kid was up like every hour. And I was like, I'm just not even going to turn that on. Like when they scored that first goal, I was in the middle of bottle feeding him. And I kind of like shuffled over into this room that I'm in right now. And of course, it wasn't us that scored first. It was them. So that was like, well, this stinks. And it's late. And I sacrificed my sleep to stay up for this. But Yeah, that would be nice, but I think they would probably say otherwise, especially in Fresno. I don't think they want to be playing at 4 in the afternoon. That's probably pretty toasty.
Not
then,
in
Only
July.
Toronto.
That would be bad.
Only Toronto's allowed day games.
Yeah. And Chattanooga there in 2020 because they didn't have lights.
Oh, yeah, can't mention that.
Yeah, we can't talk about that. We'll get fined. And then Ken Lavica says more Donny and Ross ? And then Gary Green, the Union Omaha owner, responded exactly what I was going to say. So you guys can choose which one was a joke and which one was serious. But I think those are some good ones. And I think, again, it just comes down to the league's doing a lot to invest in these broadcasts. And it's super great to see. And hopefully as the league continues to develop and grow, we end up with more things like two-man crews and maybe some more camera angles and things like that. But, I think we are very lucky to have what we have, which is great because I love watching soccer and I watch all these USL League One games. And, it's great to just be able to turn them on like that and not have to, do some weird like internet pirating like I have to do for some games.
Yeah.
I'm joking, by the way.
Clicking on those X's.
Yeah, I do not pirate anything.
No, of
not
course
even
not.
Once. Not
None
even
of
once.
us. I have never watched an illegal stream of overseas soccer games.
I wouldn't even know how to do that. And in fact, people should email me where those sites are so that I can avoid them because
Right.
I don't want them.
Exactly.
But before we go, let's do one fun thing. So we kind of joked about this in the pre-show. So Donnie does some voice work. I don't do any voice work and neither does Ross, but let's all, we'll just kind of go around the horn and do a monster truck, like 10-second spot. So Donnie, since you're the professional, do you want to go first with your monster truck rally?
A monster truck rally. Should we do a League One themed monster truck rally? I don't know. Let's go. This March, one Knoxville SC kicks off against Union Omaha. They don't actually play in March, but pretend they did. One Knoxville SC and Union Omaha. Past champion, future champion. One Knoxville SC, Union Omaha. Sunday.
Okay, that's a good one because Omaha and Madison do play on a Sunday, so I can do that tired bit too about this Sunday, the clash of the Kit Titans, Union Omaha, Ford Madison. 2 teams enter, 1 team leaves.
Well, the funny thing was last year, I think it was the playoffs. They allowed us to do a little pre-thing that we did before even the Open.
Oh, that's right.
I think all those Donnies, and we were allowed to sort of script those out. And that was when we were really allowed to do a little sort of, well, if it was an FC Tucson, it would be Sunday, or is it Monday morning? FC Tucson hosting the Greenville Triumph. Maybe. We might get to finish it at some point before the sun comes up.
Or Omaha and Warner Park, where it's like, well, we finished before the Sarpy County says we have to stop playing. Like they did a couple of years ago when the Madison-Omaha game got completely rained out, which, of course, it was like 5 minutes short of when it could be considered a full game. And then on the replay was Ross's favorite game where Trimmingham scored twice, which is a game I think most Omaha fans wish never had to happen. But besides that, great year. But again, thanks to everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Ross and Donnie, for coming on. And we'll be back with the season starting soon. We have some stuff we'll be announcing soon with some more interviews from around the league, as well as our preseason pod. And then we'll be ready to start here. And believe it or not, under a month away from the first game. So thanks for checking out Walkin' 90, and we'll catch you next time.